events. But let's have a chat about it with our panel now. Joining us this morning, Dilly Hussain, who's the deputy editor of the Muslim website 5 Pillars. Hello to you.
Morning.
And Dr. Kate Williams, who's a historian and writer. Welcome. Dilly, do you agree with that man in Wolverhampton? If you don't know where you've been, you don't know where you're going. History gives us a crucial understanding of who we are and where we're heading.
I think it's an undeniable fact that history gives individuals or even a community or a nation a sense of belonging, identity and a sort of direction for the future. But what's concerning is that the interpretation of history is quite subjective. So we saw a number of people in that documentary praising Winston Churchill. How many of those individuals are aware that Winston Churchill has been accused of perhaps the Bengal famine, which resulted in the death of 1.5 million Bengals?
But we do talk about Churchill's failures, don't we? I mean, there was the big emphasis on Gallipoli a little earlier this year, so it's not entirely positive.
But the thing is, once it's taught, for example, in schools as a part of the educational curriculum, when history is taught, it's usually taught in a quite a biased way. And I think we have to realise whatever greatness Britain has, we have to also remind, especially the youth, the human cost of that greatness or that history. And I think that would be more of a level and balanced interpretation of history. The problem is, once you teach history, especially to our youth, what we tend to do is that we glorify certain battles and wars, Waterloo, Trafalgar, Gallipoli. How do we justify Dresden? How will we teach the youth the Iraq War in 20 years? That's the problem.
And Kate, do you think people are being taught that today, or do you think we tend to focus exclusively, as Dilly was saying, on those triumphs, those military victories as a way of defining who we are?
But I think essentially it's very important to have a proper representation of British history in which there are aspects for which I think we can be very proud, such as leading the abolition of slavery, being absolutely vital, I think, within Europe for leading the abolition of slavery. But there are other parts of history in which we have to question. I think, for example, the Opium Wars, when essentially in the 19th century we said to China, we want your tea, you don't want anything of ours, so we're going to dump lots of opium on you and make you addicted. So I think we really have to see British history in its international perspective, in terms of a global perspective, and also in terms of the good things we've done and the bad things.
James, do we focus on the negative enough? And Dilly was talking about Bengal, there's Amritsar, which is coming up in a few years, and a huge massacre there. Do opium wars, as Kate was saying?
I think we focus on the negative stuff far, far too much. There's far too much hand-wringing guilt about our history. Actually, I think we should be much more celebratory. I think partly because it's true. We've done far more good things in the world than bad things. Almost everything good in the world has been invented by the British, from the internet to cricket to parliamentary democracy. There's a reason why people from all over the world, from countries like Pakistan and Syria and Libya, etc., would rather live here than everyone else, because people rightly recognise that if you're born British, you've won the lottery in life, and people value it. And the reason that this country is so great is because of our history. It's because of Magna Carta. It's because of the Industrial Revolution. Unless you understand our past, you cannot understand our present, and I think we should be celebrating it, not denigrating it.
Celebrating it, Peter. Are you proud to be British when you look back at our history?
The history of humanity is the history of groups of small groups of violent men taking control of the rest of us.
So is that a no?
And the British have done that in a kind of rather ruthless, in exactly the same ruthless fashion as every other small group of violent men taking control of the rest of us. I think the problem with history is that it's becoming a commodity. I think, you know, the reenactment of the Battle of Waterloo is the money that was spent on that is frankly just obscene. And we're all kind of being given one version of the glorious history of humanity. I think what we've just talked about in the global warming debate, what we're looking at in terms of species extinctions, means that actually, no, at times we've been on the right track, but at times we've been profoundly on the wrong track. And I think we're all being invited now to say, well, look, do we want to continue to gorge on our apparent glorious past? What a wonderful kind of Orwellian invention. Or do we want to wake up and actually say, where this concentration on history is completely denuding any
So you feel
dream
shame.
you might have.
You feel shame about
Well, no, I
a
just
lot
feel-
of what Britain has done in the past.
I feel deep shame about the manner in which it has religiously and violently subjugated other peoples. I feel deep shame about that.
James?
I'd love to know where this money, this money squandered on Waterloo is. My brother is out there at the moment for 12 days reenacting the Battle of Waterloo. He's doing it out of his own pocket. This is glorious entertainment on the 200th anniversary of one of the most
It's
important
not
battles in history. It helped relieve us from the shackles of the European Union for a good 150 years.
Let Peter finish.
You call a battle where men were butchered entertainment?
And what was the...
I think,
as far as I know, people aren't actually being killed in Waterloo in Belgium at the moment. It's a reenactment, not a literal interpretation.
What do we actually...
And
Hang on, let James finish.
the second thing is, Britain was in pretty dire straits during the Napoleonic War. Napoleon was determined on invading Britain. Near where I live, there's a place called Weedon Armoury where they stored 200,000 guns to prepare for... Britain was going to become a satrapy of France.
That's not
Napoleon
true.
had
He
his
was
way.
determined to invade. He actually, Napoleon gave up on the idea of invading Britain quite
He wanted
early
to
on.
invade originally.
Initially, but
Yeah,
quite early
so
on.
there we are.
Quite early on, by about 1803, he's given up on the idea. So that really, because his navy wasn't up to it. So when you think of the Battle of Trafalgar, by then he'd abandoned the idea of invading us. He'd gone on to the land army specially. So actually, Trafalgar wasn't the greatest victory.
He
It
had
wasn't
to
a
be
great
defeated
defeat.
at Waterloo, though. You can't deny that.
I'm not saying he
that's-
didn't have to be
that's
defeated, but he wasn't.
Well, then
it
what are you
wasn't-
arguing for?
I'm saying that he wasn't trying to invade Britain, which you were saying, and you were saying he.
Yeah, he wasn't wrong.
I'd like to hear from Dilly.
I'd like to quickly address 2 points. There has to be a distinction between necessary battles and wars, which basically puts an existential threat to any nation. You can somehow sort of argue that. But what you can't argue is the glorification of the colonization of centuries of people and the human cost. Why would you be so proud about that? And how can you actually speak on behalf of the Middle Eastern people and the North Africans, and you think that they want to live in Britain, perhaps after the destruction and the pillaging of their resources?
Are you denying that boatloads of people right now are trying
now,
to
of
cross the
course,
Mediterranean to
maybe
escape
Britain
the
stopped
hell of the
interfering.
Middle
Maybe
East?
Britain stopped
And is that
interfering
Britain's fault?
Maybe if Britain stopped interfering in the affairs of other nations, you won't see people coming over the boats and backing brutal dictators to be coming in their hundreds loads and drowning in the Mediterranean. I think we need to look at the root cause. Let's not look at the symptoms.
I feel very guilty now. Now I know it's my fault.
Yeah, no, I'm not telling you to be guilty. I'm telling you to be realistic. Right?
But should we all feel a sense of shame for that?
No, not necessarily a sense of shame. What we should do is to oppose or prevent anything like this from happening again. So when the British government or our politicians think about, you know, meddling in the affairs of other countries, we just say, well, hold on. We've learnt from history that this hasn't necessarily been conducive to our international relationship.
What part of British history would you say you were proud of?
What I'm proud of? It's a bit of a difficult question, to be honest. Why? Because you have to appreciate my background is my parents are from Bangladesh. And as I mentioned earlier, the Bengali famine. I'm quite critical of how the outcome of World War I resulted in the breakup of the Ottoman state, and the Ottoman state is something which I seek more pride and honour in.
Is there anything that you feel proud of when you look at British history?
Not necessarily British history, but I think there's some things which you can be quite content with in the way currently Britain allows the freedom to do certain things. But to be honest, am I proud of the British history? No, because a lot of it is got to do with the colonisation of people who are also...
Aren't freedoms and democracies something that have come through the battles that Britain has fought against tyrannous countries?
Not necessarily. Again, that's very subjective thing.
I think it's the aftermath as well. There's the question of, say, in World War I, we were fighting against a tyrannous Germany, and yet the reparations that we imposed on Germany after World War I put Germany into such a difficult position of poverty that it almost really created the environment in which Hitler was going to rise. So
exactly.
I think we need to look at our responsibility before battle and after battle for what exactly was going on in terms of politics. Because, you know, when you do look at history, there's a lot of land grab going on. We have this huge empire. We didn't want anyone else to have an empire. And I think it's in terms of were we securing freedom or were we securing our empire? But there are many aspects I think we should be very proud of. I think the Magna Carta, I think the abolition of slavery, I think you know, votes for women, which are your people in Wolverhampton were obviously so well knowledgeable about. And there are very many importance which I think we did lead the country and the world
Also,
in terms of democracy.
I think it's
but
quite
there are many times we
important.
didn't.
It's quite important to remember that you know, as British people, that we don't assume that we represent the default position of morality. I think we need to humble ourselves a bit more and realise that, look...
All right, well, we need a little bit more humility when we're looking back at our history, James, to give it context.
I find it very depressing that somebody who is enjoying all the benefits of living in one of the world's most stable democracies is dissing what... This is your country. This is your history. It's not just my history, it's your history
You're
too.
Dictating what
and I'm sorry
opinion.
that you can't understand, you lack the imagination to understand that. You can't understand that the reason Britain is the way it is, the reason so many people want to be here, is because of our many achievements. You just want to diss it. I think this is a recipe for cultural disaster. We need cultural cohesion. Because I'm not a cultural relativist like you. I don't believe in sort of these separate groups that have different views about...
What were those great achievements? At what cost?
I've said some of them.
So
on balance, I think that Britain has done far more good than harm, and I don't think you could say that about many of the cultures in the world.
Does it leave you uncomfortable, Dilly, that you are in a society and a country that you feel so much shame about?
Sean, I was born here. And I was educated here. I have many non-Muslim white Caucasian friends, and we get along fine, but we can have a real discussion about history and the present and the direction of our future. So that doesn't necessarily mean I despise this country. Well, it means that I want the betterment for this country. I'm a citizen of this country, so I want the betterment of this country. So surely, am I not allowed to criticise?
Where would you feel happier?
Pardon?
Where would you feel happier? Point to me some countries which do it better.
I'm happy where I am at the moment.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
You happy?
Well, I hope so, yeah.
That's good.
Let's hear whether you're happy at home. Get an update from Tommy about how you feel about being British and British history. Tommy.
I'm quite critical of how the outcome of World War I resulted in the breakup of the Ottoman state, and the Ottoman state is something which I seek more pride and honour in.